The mansion sat on the edge of a sprawling estate, tucked away from the bustling city that lay miles beyond its gates. The grand structure, with its towering columns and sprawling wings, was a silent witness to the countless stories that unfolded within its walls. It was a place of luxury, of opulence that most could only dream of, but also a place where secrets lingered in the shadows. Buried deep within the marble and stone that in this mansion lived a man whose name had become synonymous with wealth and power. Jonathan Ashford was a figure larger than life, a man whose business acumen and financial prowess had propelled him to the upper echelons of society. His name was whispered in reverence in boardrooms, and his signature on a contract could change the course of fortunes. Yet, despite the enormous success that defined his public persona, Jonathan was known for something far more personal, far more poignant: his unwavering dedication to his only son, Daniel. Daniel Ashford was a name that evoked a different kind of reverence. Unlike his father, Daniel's fame was not built on wealth or power, but on a story that touched the hearts of many. Daniel had been paralyzed in a tragic accident at the tender age of 8, and from that day forward, his life and the life of his father had changed irrevocably. The world watched as Jonathan, the titan of industry, became a devoted caregiver, putting aside the demands of his empire to care for his son. For 20 long years, Jonathan cared for Daniel with a devotion that seemed almost unimaginable. He was there for every need, every challenge, every moment of despair. The world saw a father who had given up everything to ensure his son's comfort and happiness. It was a story that painted Jonathan not just as a millionaire, but as a man of extraordinary character, a hero in the eyes of many. But behind the closed doors of the Ashford mansion, there were layers to this story that the public could never see. The grandeur of the estate, the seemingly perfect facade of their lives, concealed the complexities of their relationship, the struggles that no amount of wealth could ease, and the burden of a secret so profound that it threatened to unravel everything Jonathan had worked so hard to protect. The accident that left Daniel paralyzed was not just a turning point in their lives. It was the catalyst for a journey that neither father nor son had anticipated. The doctors had been clear: Daniel would never walk again, his body rendered immobile from the neck down. But they had also assured Jonathan that his son's mind remained sharp, his intellect untouched by the tragedy that had befallen him. It was this mind that Jonathan sought to nurture, believing that if Daniel could not experience the world physically, he could still engage with it mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Jonathan transformed a wing of the mansion into a sanctuary for his son. It was a place where Daniel could continue his education, delve into books and art, explore the world through technology, and maintain some semblance of independence. It was a space filled with the latest advancements in medical care, but also with the warmth of personal touches: Daniel's favorite books, photographs of happier times, and art that sparked joy in his heart. But despite the care, despite the love that Jonathan poured into creating this environment for his son, there was a void that nothing could fill. Daniel, once a vibrant and energetic child, had become a young man whose world had shrunk to the size of a room. The outside world continued to spin, full of opportunities and adventures that were no longer accessible to him. And while his mind remained a sharp tool, the limitations of his body became an ever-present reminder of what he had lost. For Jonathan, this reality was a constant source of pain, a pain that he hid behind a stoic exterior. To the world, he was the epitome of strength, a man who had taken on the responsibility of caring for his son with grace and determination. But in the quiet moments, when the world was not watching, Jonathan allowed himself to feel the weight of his circumstances. He would sit by Daniel's side, holding his hand, watching the rise and fall of his son's chest, and wonder how different life might have been if that tragic day had never happened. The bond between father and son was undeniable, forged in the crucible of shared suffering. Jonathan often found himself reminiscing about the days before the accident, when Daniel's laughter echoed through the halls of the mansion, when their lives were filled with the simple joys that most families took for granted. Those memories were bittersweet now, a reminder of a time that could never be reclaimed. Yet, Jonathan refused to dwell in the past. He had made a promise to himself, and more importantly, to Daniel, that he would provide the best life possible under the circumstances. And so, he threw himself into the role of caregiver with the same intensity that he had once devoted to his business empire. He became an expert in his son's medical needs, learned to navigate the complex world of healthcare, and ensured that Daniel had access to the best doctors, therapists, and equipment. But no amount of care could change the fact that Daniel's condition was permanent. It was a reality that Jonathan had to face every single day, a reality that was both heartbreaking and humbling. The mansion, once a symbol of success and achievement, had become a gilded cage, where father and son lived in a state of suspended animation, their lives dictated by the routines of care and the limitations of Daniel's condition. Despite the challenges, Jonathan found solace in the small victories. A smile from Daniel, a moment of laughter, a day when the pain was manageable. These were the things that kept him going. He had learned to appreciate the little things, to find joy in the moments that others might overlook. But even in these moments of happiness, there was an undercurrent of sadness, a recognition that their lives had been forever altered by a twist of fate that neither could control. As the years passed, Jonathan's dedication to his son became a defining feature of his life. He was no longer just a millionaire, a man of wealth and influence. He was a father who had sacrificed everything for his child, a man whose love knew no bounds. The public saw him as a hero, a man who had chosen to put his family above all else. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the toll that this life had taken on him. That Jonathan's world had become one of constant vigilance, of endless worry and responsibility. There were no vacations, no breaks, no moments of respite. His life was dictated by the needs of his son, and while he never complained, the strain was evident to those who looked closely enough. The once vibrant man had grown weary, his shoulders heavy with the burden of care. His eyes, once filled with the fire of ambition, now held a deep sadness, a reflection of the pain he carried with him every day. The world around them continued to change, but inside the mansion, time seemed to stand still. The routines of care became a way of life, a rhythm that both Jonathan and Daniel had come to accept. But beneath the surface, there was a tension, a sense that something was amiss, something that neither father nor son was willing to confront. The secret that Jonathan held was not one of malice or deceit, but of protection, a protection born out of love, but one that would ultimately test the very foundations of their relationship. It was a secret that he had kept for years, believing that it was the best way to shield his son from further pain. But as the years went by, the weight of this secret grew heavier, and Jonathan found himself grappling with the implications of what he had done. As Jonathan navigated the complexities of his son's care, he also had to contend with the demands of his business empire. Though he had stepped back from day-to-day operations, he remained the figurehead of Ashford Enterprises, a company that had grown exponentially over the years. His fortune continued to grow, his influence remained strong, but none of it seemed to matter in the face of the challenges he faced at home. The mansion, once a place of joy and celebration, had become a fortress, guarding not only the physical bodies of Jonathan and Daniel, but also the emotional wounds that had yet to heal. The walls that had witnessed so much life now stood as silent sentinels, bearing witness to the isolation and loneliness that had seeped into their lives. The grandeur of the estate, with its manicured gardens and luxurious interiors, seemed almost ironic now, a stark contrast to the reality of their existence. And yet, amidst the isolation, there was a sense of purpose that drove Jonathan forward. He had committed himself to this life, to the care of his son, and nothing would deter him from fulfilling that commitment. It was a life that required sacrifice, patience, and a resilience that few could understand. But it was also a life that was bound by love, a love that, despite the hardships, remained unshakable. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into years, Jonathan's world became increasingly insular. The mansion, once a hub of social activity, now rarely saw visitors. The staff, who had been with the family for years, went about their duties with quiet efficiency, respecting the privacy of the Ashfords. The outside world, with its noise and chaos, seemed a distant memory, replaced by the stillness of a life lived in the shadow of a great tragedy. Jonathan found himself becoming more introspective, reflecting on the choices he had made, the paths he had taken. He wondered if there had been another way, a different path that might have led to a better outcome. But these thoughts were fleeting, quickly replaced by the demands of the present. There was always something that needed to be done, a task that required his attention, a problem that needed solving. There was no time for regret, no space for what-ifs. But as much as Jonathan tried to keep moving forward, the past had a way of creeping back into his thoughts. He couldn't escape the memories of that fateful day, the day that had changed everything. It was a day that he had tried to forget, to push to the back of his mind, but it lingered, a ghost that haunted him in the quiet moments. And then there was the secret that he had kept for so long, a secret that had become a part of him, woven into the fabric of his life. It was a secret that he had justified to himself, rationalized as necessary, but as the years passed, he began to question whether he had made the right choice. The weight of this secret was growing heavier, and he knew that one day it would have to come to light. But that day was not today. Today, there were more pressing concerns, more immediate needs. Jonathan pushed the thoughts of the past and the secret to the back of his mind, focusing instead on the tasks at hand. There was always something that needed his attention, always a new challenge to overcome. And so, life continued at the Ashford Mansion, a life defined by routine and care, by love and sacrifice, by the bond between a father and his son. It was a life that few could truly understand, a life that was both extraordinary and ordinary in its own way. As the sun set on another day, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, Jonathan sat by his son's side, as he did every evening. He held Daniel's hand, feeling the warmth of his son's skin, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The worries, the doubts, the secrets, they all seemed to disappear in the face of this simple act of love. But deep down, Jonathan knew that the peace he felt in these moments was temporary. The challenges they faced were not going away, and the secret he held would one day demand to be revealed. Until then, all he could do was continue on, one day at a time, doing his best to provide the life he had promised his son, a life filled with love, even in the face of unimaginable loss. And so, as night fell over the Ashford Mansion, the world outside continued to spin, unaware of the story unfolding within its walls. It was a story of love and sacrifice, of secrets and lies, of a father and son bound together by fate. A story that was far from over, with chapters yet to be written and truths yet to be revealed. But for now, all was quiet in the Ashford Mansion. The world slept, and so did Daniel, his father by his side, watching over him as he had done for the past 20 years. The mansion stood tall and silent, a fortress guarding the lives within, and the secrets that lay buried deep inside. The story of Daniel Ashford, the paralyzed son of Jonathan Ashford, began like so many others, with a moment of pure, unbridled joy. It was a warm summer afternoon, the kind that made the world feel limitless and full of promise. Daniel, just 8 years old, had been playing in the garden of the Ashford Mansion, his laughter ringing through the air like a melody. He was a child of boundless energy, always moving, always exploring, his curiosity leading him on adventures that took him far beyond the confines of the estate. That day, Daniel's adventure had led him to the edge of the property, where a steep hill descended into a small, wooded area. It was a place he had been warned about, a place where the ground was uneven and the trees grew close together, making it easy to get lost or hurt. But Daniel, with the fearlessness of youth, had seen the hill as a challenge, a new frontier to conquer. As he stood at the top of the hill, the world spread out before him. Daniel felt a surge of excitement. He could hear the distant sounds of the city, the faint hum of life beyond the estate, and he imagined what it might be like to explore those places one day, to venture beyond the walls of his home and see the world for himself. Without hesitation, Daniel took a step forward, and then another, his small feet moving quickly over the grass. He began to run, the wind rushing past him, his heart pounding with exhilaration. But as he picked up speed, The ground beneath him suddenly shifted, the earth giving way under his feet. He stumbled, his arms flailing as he tried to regain his balance, but it was too late. He fell, tumbling down the hill, his body rolling uncontrollably as the world around him became a blur of green and brown. The fall seemed to last forever, each second stretching out into an eternity of terror. Daniel's mind raced, his thoughts a chaotic jumble of fear and confusion. He tried to grab onto something, anything, to stop his descent, but there was nothing to hold on to. The ground was unforgiving, the impact of each bounce sending shockwaves of pain through his small body. Finally, with a sickening thud, Daniel came to a stop at the bottom of the hill. He lay there, dazed and disoriented, his body bruised and battered. The world around him seemed to spin, and for a moment, everything went black. When he opened his eyes again, the first thing Daniel noticed was the pain. It was an all-encompassing agony, radiating from his neck and back, spreading outwards like fire. He tried to move, to sit up, but his body wouldn't respond. Panic set in as he realized that he couldn't feel his legs, couldn't move his arms. He was trapped, helpless, lying in the dirt at the bottom of a hill that had once seemed like an exciting challenge. Daniel tried to call out for help, but his voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. The wooded area was far from the main house, and there was no one around to hear him. He lay there, the pain intensifying with each passing moment, his mind racing with fear and confusion. He didn't understand what had happened, didn't know why his body wouldn't obey him. All he knew was that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the forest, and still, Daniel lay there, paralyzed and alone. His mind drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain ebbing and flowing like the tide. He thought about his father, about how worried he must be, how he would come looking for him, how everything would be okay once he was found. At it was nearly nightfall when Jonathan Ashford, frantic with worry, finally found his son. He had searched the entire estate, his heart pounding with fear as each passing moment brought no sign of Daniel. When he finally reached the bottom of the hill and saw his son lying there, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, his face pale and drawn, Jonathan's heart nearly stopped. He rushed to Daniel's side, his hands shaking as he gently touched his son's face, his voice trembling as he called out to him. But Daniel didn't respond. His eyes glazed over, his breath shallow and labored. Jonathan knew, in that moment, that something was horribly wrong. Without wasting another second, Jonathan scooped Daniel up in his arms, cradling his son's limp body against his chest. He could feel the unnatural stillness in Daniel's limbs, the way his body didn't respond to being moved. Panic clawed at Jonathan's chest as he ran back up the hill, his mind racing with fear and desperation. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Jonathan carried Daniel to the car, driving with reckless speed to the nearest hospital, his mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. He kept glancing over at Daniel, lying so still in the passenger seat, his small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Jonathan's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, his thoughts racing with fear and the need to get his son to safety. At the hospital, the doctors and nurses moved quickly, whisking Daniel away from Jonathan's arms and into the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of the emergency room. Jonathan could do nothing but wait, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. He paced the waiting room, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling his nostrils, the harsh lighting casting sharp shadows across the room. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor emerged from the double doors, his face grave. Jonathan rushed over, his heart in his throat, desperate for answers. The doctor's words were measured, carefully chosen, but the message was clear. Daniel had suffered a severe spinal cord injury. The fall had fractured several of the vertebrae in his neck, severing the delicate nerves that controlled movement and sensation in his body. The damage was irreversible. Jonathan's world collapsed in that moment. The doctor's words seemed to echo in his mind, repeating over and over, each repetition driving the reality deeper into his consciousness. Daniel would never walk again. He would never run through the gardens, never climb a tree, never feel the ground beneath his feet. His son, his vibrant, energetic son, was paralyzed from the neck down. In the days that followed, Jonathan moved through life in a daze. He stayed by Daniel's side, watching over him as the doctors and nurses tended to his every need. Daniel was in and out of consciousness, his small body overwhelmed by the trauma it had endured. When he was awake, he was confused, scared, unable to understand why he couldn't move, why his father looked at him with such sadness in his eyes. The doctors explained that Daniel's spinal cord injury was among the most severe they had seen. The damage was complete, meaning that Daniel had lost all movement and sensation below the neck. He would require constant care for the rest of his life, relying on others for even the most basic tasks. Jonathan listened to the doctors, nodding mechanically as they outlined the challenges that lay ahead. He would need to make arrangements for Daniel's care, they said, ensure that his home was equipped with the necessary medical equipment, hire nurses and therapists who could assist with his son's needs. They spoke of physical therapy, of occupational therapy, of ways to help Daniel adjust to his new reality. But Jonathan could barely process their words. All he could think about was the look in Daniel's eyes when he asked his father why he couldn't move, why he couldn't feel his legs. Jonathan had no answer for him, no way to explain the tragedy that had befallen his son. He could only hold Daniel's hand, reassuring him that everything would be okay, even though he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks and months that followed were a blur of activity as Jonathan worked to create a new life for his son. He transformed their home into a space that could accommodate Daniel's needs, installing ramps and lifts, converting rooms into therapy spaces, hiring a team of caregivers who could provide the round-the-clock care that Daniel would require. To Daniel's room became the center of this new world. Once a typical child's bedroom, filled with toys and books, it was now a hybrid space that served as both a living area and a medical hub. The bed was replaced with a specialized hospital bed, designed to prevent bed sores and provide comfort for long hours of immobility. Machines surrounded the bed, humming quietly as they monitored Daniel's vital signs, assisted with his breathing, and administered medication. But despite all the changes, despite the best efforts of the doctors, therapists, and caregivers, Daniel remained a shadow of his former self. The vibrant, energetic boy who had once filled the house with laughter was gone, replaced by a child who rarely spoke, who stared out the window with a vacant expression, his eyes filled with a sadness that no amount of comfort could erase. Jonathan spent every moment he could by Daniel's side, reading to him, talking to him, trying to bring back some semblance of the life they had once known. But Daniel's responses were few and far between, his voice barely more than a whisper when he did speak. The light that had once shone so brightly in his eyes was dimmed, overshadowed by the weight of his new reality. As the years passed, Daniel's condition stabilized, but the emotional toll became more apparent. He rarely smiled, his laughter a distant memory. The child who had once been so full of life was now withdrawn, his world reduced to the confines of his room, his days dictated by a routine of care that offered little in the way of joy or fulfillment. Jonathan watched helplessly as his son slipped further and further into a state of despair. He did everything he could to make life easier for Daniel, to bring some semblance of happiness back into his life. He filled the room with Daniel's favorite books, installed a television and gaming console, brought in tutors and therapists who could engage his son's mind and spirit. But nothing seemed to reach Daniel. He would go through the motions, completing his therapy sessions, listening to the tutors, but there was no enthusiasm, no spark. His mind remained sharp, his intellect untouched by the injury, but his spirit was broken. The joy that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding sadness that no amount of care or comfort could alleviate. That Jonathan's heart broke every day as he watched his son struggle. He blamed himself for what had happened, tortured himself with thoughts of how he could have prevented the accident, how he could have kept Daniel safe. The guilt weighed heavily on him, a constant presence that he couldn't escape. But despite the guilt, despite the pain, Jonathan never wavered in his commitment to his son. He had made a promise to Daniel, a promise that he would do everything in his power to give him the best life possible, no matter the circumstances. And so, he continued to fight for his son, to advocate for him, to provide him with every opportunity, every comfort, every ounce of love he had to give. The mansion, once a symbol of luxury and success, had become a place of quiet sorrow. The halls that had once echoed with laughter and life were now silent, the staff moving about with a somber efficiency, their footsteps muffled on the thick carpets. The grandeur of the estate seemed almost mocking now, a reminder of a life that could never be reclaimed. But within those walls, Jonathan and Daniel forged a new bond, one born out of shared suffering and a deep, abiding love. Jonathan became not just a father, but a caregiver, a protector, a constant presence in Daniel's life. He learned to navigate the complex world of disability, becoming an expert in his son's needs, advocating for his care, ensuring that he had access to the best doctors, therapists, and equipment. The years passed in a blur of routine and care, each day blending into the next. Jonathan's world became increasingly insular, focused entirely on Daniel's needs. The business empire that he had once dedicated his life to took a back seat, the demands of wealth and power paling in comparison to the demands of caring for his son. But despite the challenges, despite the sorrow that permeated their lives, there were moments of connection, moments of love that kept Jonathan going. A smile from Daniel, however rare, was a victory. A moment of laughter, however fleeting, was a gift. Jonathan learned to appreciate these small moments, to find joy in the simple act of being with his son, of holding his hand, of watching over him as he slept. And so, life continued at the Ashford mansion. The world outside moved on, oblivious to the struggles within, but within those walls, a father and son continued to navigate the complexities of their new reality, bound together by love, by loss, and by the shared experience of a tragedy that had forever altered the course of their lives. In the years following Daniel's accident, the Ashford mansion became a place where time seemed to stand still. The world outside continued to evolve, its relentless pace unyielding, but within the grand walls of the estate, life had taken on a different rhythm. Every day was a repetition of the last, defined by routines that catered to Daniel's needs. The once vibrant house, known for its grandeur and the lively social gatherings hosted by Jonathan Ashford, now felt like a tomb, quiet, secluded, and full of shadows. But there was one shadow in particular that loomed over Jonathan Ashford, a secret that he had carried with him for 2 decades, a burden that had grown heavier with each passing year. It was a secret that gnawed at him, one that he had locked away in the deepest recesses of his mind, hoping it would never see the light of day. Yet, despite his best efforts to bury it, the secret lingered, casting a pall over every aspect of his life. This secret was tied not only to the events that had led to Daniel's paralysis, but to something far more insidious, a truth that, if revealed, had the potential to shatter the carefully constructed world that Jonathan had built around his son. It was a truth that Jonathan had sworn to protect at all costs, even if it meant living a life of perpetual deceit. The day Daniel had tumbled down that hill was the day that everything changed, but it wasn't the accident itself that haunted Jonathan. It was what had happened in the moments leading up to it. Those moments were burned into Jonathan's memory, a series of events that he replayed in his mind over and over, searching for the point at which everything had gone wrong. He had been there, standing at the top of the hill, watching as Daniel ran toward the edge, his small legs carrying him faster than Jonathan could have anticipated. Jonathan had called out to his son, his voice sharp with a mixture of fear and frustration. He remembered the way Daniel had looked back at him, a mixture of defiance and excitement in his eyes, a look that Jonathan had seen many times before. Daniel had always been a fearless child, eager to test boundaries, to push the limits of what he was capable of. It was a trait that Jonathan admired in his son, a reflection of his own ambitious nature. But on that day, Jonathan's admiration had been clouded by something else, something darker. He had been in a foul mood that afternoon, his mind preoccupied with business matters that had gone awry, deals that were falling through, investments that were turning sour. The pressure of maintaining the Ashford empire had been weighing heavily on him, and Daniel's relentless energy had only added to his irritation. Jonathan had snapped at his son, telling him to stay away from the hill, to stop running off where he couldn't see him. But Daniel, in his youthful defiance, had ignored his father's command, his laughter echoing in the distance as he sprinted toward the edge. In that moment, Jonathan had felt a flash of anger, a brief, irrational thought that he would later come to regret more than anything else in his life. He had taken a step forward, intending to grab Daniel and pull him back, but something in him had hesitated. It was a split-second decision, a momentary lapse in judgment, but it was enough. As he watched Daniel trip and fall, his body hurtling down the steep incline, Jonathan had been paralyzed, not by fear, but by the realization that he could have prevented it. He could have stopped Daniel, could have reached out and pulled him back from the edge, but he hadn't. And in that split second, everything had changed. The guilt that followed was immediate and all-consuming. Jonathan had rushed to his son's side, his heart pounding with terror, his mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. As he cradled Daniel's broken body in his arms, he knew that this was his fault. It didn't matter that it had been an accident, that Daniel had made the choice to run. Jonathan had hesitated, and that hesitation had cost his son everything. But there was more to the story than just a moment of hesitation. As the weeks turned into months, and the reality of Daniel's condition became clear, Jonathan's guilt deepened, taking on a life of its own. He began to see the accident as more than just a tragic event. He saw it as a punishment, a manifestation of the darkness that had been growing inside him for years. Because, deep down, Jonathan knew that the accident wasn't just a random tragedy. It was the culmination of a series of choices he had made, choices that had led him down a path of deception and betrayal. Choices that had created a rift between him and the people he loved, a rift that had ultimately led to Daniel's fall. The truth was, Jonathan Ashford had been living a lie long before Daniel's accident. It was a lie that had started small, a series of white lies told to protect his business interests, to keep his family safe from the harsh realities of the world. But over time, those lies had grown, multiplying like a cancer, until they had become a part of who he was. That IT had started with the business. Jonathan had always been driven, always hungry for success. But as the years went by, that hunger had turned into something more, a relentless pursuit of power and wealth, no matter the cost. He had made deals with people he shouldn't have, cut corners where he knew he shouldn't, all in the name of securing the future of the Ashford legacy. And in doing so, he had made enemies, people who were willing to do whatever it took to bring him down, that as the pressures mounted. Jonathan had found himself turning to other means to cope. He began to distance himself from his family, spending more time at the office, less time at home. He justified it to himself, telling himself that he was doing it for them, that he was building a future for Daniel, securing his son's place in the world. But in reality, he was running from the guilt, from the lies, from the knowledge that he was becoming someone he didn't recognize. The final straw had come just weeks before the accident, when Jonathan had been approached by a man named Vincent Blackwell, a shadowy figure who had made a name for himself in the underworld of corporate espionage. Blackwell had offered Jonathan a deal, a way to eliminate his competitors once and for all, to secure his place at the top of the business world. It was a deal that came with a steep price, one that Jonathan knew he shouldn't pay, but the temptation had been too great. Jonathan had agreed to Blackwell's terms, knowing full well the risks involved. He had told himself that it was a necessary evil, that he had no choice if he wanted to protect his family's future. But deep down, he knew that he was making a deal with the devil, that he was selling his soul for a chance at power. And then the accident had happened, that in the aftermath, as Daniel lay in a hospital bed, his life forever changed. Jonathan had been consumed by guilt, not just for what had happened to his son, but for the choices he had made that had led them to this point. He had turned to Blackwell out of desperation, out of a desire to protect his family, but in doing so, he had put them in even greater danger. And now, the price he had paid was his son's future. Jonathan had tried to bury the guilt, to focus on caring for Daniel, on being the father his son needed him to be. But the secret of what he had done weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the man he had become. He couldn't escape it, no matter how hard he tried. The deal he had made with Blackwell had set off a chain of events that he couldn't control, and now, all he could do was wait for the fallout. In the years that followed, Jonathan had done everything in his power to shield Daniel from the truth. He had created a world within the mansion, a sanctuary where his son could live without fear, without the knowledge of the darkness that lurked just outside their door. He had surrounded Daniel with love and care, with the best doctors, therapists, and teachers money could buy, all in an effort to make up for the choices he had made. But even as he tried to protect Daniel, Jonathan knew that the secret couldn't stay hidden forever. The deal he had made with Blackwell was a ticking time bomb, one that could go off at any moment. And when it did, the life he had built for his son would come crashing down. Jonathan had tried to sever ties with Blackwell, to distance himself from the man who had become a constant presence in his life. But Blackwell was not a man who could be easily discarded. He had made it clear that Jonathan owed him, and that debt would be paid, one way or another. The years passed, and Jonathan lived in a state of constant tension, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. He watched as Daniel grew into a young man, his mind sharp, his spirit strong, despite the limitations of his body. Daniel had a resilience that Jonathan admired, a determination to live his life to the fullest, even in the face of unimaginable challenges. But even as he admired his son's strength, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed him. He had promised Daniel the world, but in reality, he had given him a life built on lies. The mansion that was their home had become a prison, not just for Daniel, but for Jonathan as well, a place where the past was always lurking, where the future was uncertain, where the truth could destroy everything. As Daniel reached adulthood, the pressure on Jonathan increased. Blackwell's demands became more insistent, more threatening. Jonathan knew that he was running out of time, that the secret he had kept for so long was about to be exposed. He had tried to prepare for the inevitable, to put plans in place to protect Daniel, but deep down, he knew that there was no way to truly shield his son from what was coming. To Jonathan's world had become a house of cards, and all it would take was one gust of wind to bring it all down. He had lived with the knowledge of what he had done for so long that it had become a part of him, a dark shadow that followed him wherever he went. And now, as the years stretched on and the weight of the secret grew heavier, Jonathan found himself wondering how much longer he could keep it hidden. He had always prided himself on being a man of strength, of determination. But the truth was that he was tired. Tired of the lies, tired of the deceit, tired of living in fear of the day when the truth would finally come out. He had sacrificed so much to protect his son, to give Daniel the life he deserved, but in the process, he had lost himself. The secret that Jonathan had kept for so long was more than just a dark chapter in his life. It was a reflection of who he had become, a man who had strayed so far from the ideals he had once held dear. He had always believed that he was doing the right thing, that he was making the choices necessary to protect his family. But now, as he stood on the brink of losing everything, he wasn't so sure. The guilt that had been Jonathan's constant companion for so many years had taken its toll, wearing him down, breaking him in ways that he could never have imagined. He had built his life on a foundation of lies. And now, as the truth threatened to come crashing down around him, he found himself questioning everything he had ever believed in. Jonathan knew that the time was coming when he would have to face the consequences of his actions, when the secret he had kept for so long would finally be revealed. He had tried to prepare himself for that moment, to steel himself against the inevitable. But the truth was that he was terrified of what the truth would mean for his son, for the life they had built together. The secret that Jonathan had kept was more than just a burden. It was a part of him, a dark shadow that had shaped every decision he had made since that fateful day. And now, as the walls of the Ashford mansion closed in around him, as the weight of the past pressed down on him, Jonathan found himself wondering if he had the strength to face what was coming. For 20 years, Jonathan had kept the secret, had lived with the guilt, had tried to make amends for the choices he had made. But now, as the truth threatened to tear apart the life he had built, he found himself questioning whether it had all been worth it. He had sacrificed so much, given up so much, all in the name of protecting his son. But in the end, had he only succeeded in protecting himself from the truth? The secret that Jonathan Ashford had kept for so long was a dark, twisted tale of ambition, betrayal, and the lengths to which a man would go to protect his family. It was a story that he had hoped would never be told, a chapter of his life that he had tried to close the door on. But now, as the past caught up with him, Jonathan knew that the time had come to face the truth, no matter the cost. Because in the end, the secret that Jonathan had kept wasn't just about what had happened on that hill so many years ago. It was about the choices he had made in the years since, the lies he had told, the deals he had made, and the man he had become. And as the truth threatened to come to light, Jonathan found himself wondering if he had the strength to face it, or if he would finally be consumed by the darkness that had haunted him for so long. The secrets we keep often define us more than the truths we share. And for Jonathan Ashford, this was an axiom that had become the cornerstone of his existence. The weight of his hidden truth was something that had pressed upon him day after day, year after year, with a relentless persistence that he had learned to endure. But endurance and acceptance are two very different things, and as the years wore on, Jonathan found himself increasingly consumed by the knowledge that he was living a life built on a foundation of lies, a house of cards that could collapse at any moment. Jonathan Ashford, by all outward appearances, was a man who had it all. His wealth was legendary, his business acumen revered, and his reputation as a devoted father and philanthropist had been the subject of admiration in many circles. But beneath the polished veneer of his public persona, Jonathan harbored a secret that gnawed at his conscience. A secret that was inextricably linked to the life-altering accident that had left his beloved son, Daniel, paralyzed. The accident had been the defining moment in both their lives, a tragedy that had rewritten the narrative of their future. But while the world saw it as a heartbreaking twist of fate, Jonathan knew that there was more to the story, much more than he had ever revealed. Even to those closest to him, to understand the depths of Jonathan's secret, one must first understand the nature of the bond between father and son. From the moment Daniel was born, Jonathan had seen him as more than just a son. He was an extension of himself, the embodiment of all his hopes, dreams, and ambitions. Jonathan had poured everything he had into Daniel, determined to give him the best possible life, the finest education, and every opportunity to succeed. He had envisioned a future for his son that was as boundless as the horizons he had chased in his own youth. But Jonathan's love for Daniel was not without its complexities. The intensity of his feelings for his son was matched only by his expectations. And as Daniel grew, so too did the pressure that Jonathan placed upon him. Jonathan wanted his son to excel, to be the best, to carry on the Ashford legacy with the same drive and determination that had defined his own career. It was a burden that Daniel bore with grace and resilience, but it was a burden nonetheless. The day of the accident had been an ordinary one, or at least it had started out that way. Jonathan had taken Daniel on a weekend retreat to the family's country estate, a sprawling property that had been in the Ashford family for generations. It was a place of peace and tranquility, a haven where they could escape the pressures of the city and the demands of their respective lives. But on that day, something had been different. Jonathan had been distracted, his mind preoccupied with a business deal that had gone sour, a venture that threatened to unravel years of hard work. He had been irritable, snapping at Daniel over trivial matters, his temper frayed by the stress that had been building for weeks. Daniel, in turn, had sensed his father's mood and had tried to give him space, retreating to his favorite spot on the estate, a hill that overlooked the vast expanse of their land. That it was there, on that hill, that everything had changed. Jonathan had arrived at the top of the hill just in time to see Daniel lose his footing, his body pitching forward as he tumbled down the steep incline. The memory of that moment was seared into Jonathan's mind. The helplessness, the horror, the sound of his son's body striking the ground as he fell. He had rushed to Daniel's side, his heart pounding with fear, praying that his son would be okay, that this was just a bad dream from which he would soon wake. But it wasn't a dream, and as the days turned into weeks and the severity of Daniel's injuries became clear, Jonathan was forced to confront a reality that he had never imagined. His son was paralyzed, his spine shattered in the fall, and nothing would ever be the same again. The world saw Jonathan's reaction to the accident as that of a devoted father who would stop at nothing to care for his injured son. They saw a man who had put his life on hold to ensure that Daniel received the best medical care, the finest rehabilitation, and every possible comfort. They saw a father who had sacrificed everything for his son, a man whose love knew no bounds. But what the world didn't see What Jonathan had kept hidden from everyone, including Daniel, was the role that he had played in the events leading up to the accident. It was a truth that he had buried deep within himself, a truth that he could barely bring himself to acknowledge, even in the darkest corners of his own mind. Jonathan had always prided himself on being a man of control over his business, his life, and his emotions. But on that day, he had lost control, not just of the situation, but of himself. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface had erupted in a moment of weakness, a flash of temper that had blinded him to everything else. And in that moment, he had done something that he would regret for the rest of his life, that he had pushed Daniel, literally and figuratively, toward the edge. It hadn't been a conscious decision, not in the way that people plan out their actions. It had been a momentary lapse, a split second of frustration and impatience that had led to a gesture more forceful than it should have been. Jonathan had been trying to get Daniel's attention, to snap him out of the reverie that had taken hold of him as he stood at the edge of the hill, lost in thought. But in his anger, Jonathan had misjudged the situation, had underestimated the slope and the loose soil beneath their feet. He had reached out to grab Daniel's arm, to pull him back from the edge, but his grip had been too rough, his movements too abrupt. Instead of steadying his son, he had unbalanced him, sending him teetering forward into the void. It had happened so quickly that Jonathan barely had time to react. And by the time he realized what had happened, it was too late. Daniel was already falling, his body twisting in the air as he plummeted down the hill. The look of shock and betrayal in his son's eyes as he fell was something that Jonathan would never forget. A haunting reminder of the moment when everything had gone horribly wrong in the aftermath of the accident. Jonathan had told himself that it had been just that, an accident. He had convinced himself that he hadn't meant to hurt Daniel, that it had been a tragic misstep, a freak occurrence that no one could have predicted. But deep down, he knew the truth. His actions, however unintended, had directly led to his son's injury. And that knowledge had become the defining secret of his life. A secret that he had sworn to carry to his grave. But secrets have a way of seeping into every aspect of our lives, shaping our thoughts, our actions, and our relationships in ways that we can't always anticipate. For Jonathan, the weight of his secret began to manifest in subtle, insidious ways. It colored his interactions with Daniel, creating an invisible barrier between them that he couldn't seem to breach. No matter how much he tried to be the perfect father, the perfect caregiver, there was always a part of him that held back. A part of him that feared his son would one day discover the truth that Jonathan's guilt drove him to overcompensate in other areas of his life. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, determined to ensure that Daniel would want for nothing. He expanded his business empire, acquiring new companies, diversifying his investments, and building a financial safety net that would secure his son's future. He spared no expense when it came to Daniel's care, hiring the best doctors, therapists, and tutors to help him adapt to his new reality. But no matter how much he achieved, no matter how much wealth and power he accumulated, it was never enough to silence the voice in the back of his mind. The voice that reminded him, day after day, that he was responsible for his son's suffering. The years passed, and Daniel grew into a man, his body confined to a wheelchair, but his mind as sharp and inquisitive as ever. He pursued his studies with a determination that both inspired and humbled Jonathan, who saw in his son a resilience that he could only admire from a distance. Daniel's achievements became a source of pride for Jonathan, but they also served as a constant reminder of the life that had been stolen from him. A life that might have been, if not for that one terrible moment, that Jonathan's relationship with Daniel remained strong, at least on the surface. They shared a deep bond, forged in the crucible of tragedy and tempered by years of shared experience. But beneath that bond lay a tension that Jonathan could never fully dispel. A tension born of the secret that he carried and the fear that it would one day come to light. There were moments when Jonathan considered telling Daniel the truth. Moments when the weight of his guilt became too much to bear, when the thought of living another day with his secret seemed impossible. But each time, he stopped himself, convinced that revealing the truth would only cause more harm than good. He told himself that Daniel had suffered enough, that he didn't need to know the full extent of his father's culpability. But in his heart, Jonathan knew that his decision was motivated as much by fear as by concern for his son. Fear of losing the one person who meant more to him than anything else in the world. Fear of shattering the fragile peace they had built together. Fear of facing the consequences of his actions, not just in the eyes of his son, but in his own. And so, the years continued to slip by, each one marked by the same unspoken tension, the same unacknowledged truth that hovered between them like a shadow. Jonathan's business empire grew. His reputation remained intact, and the world continued to see him as a paragon of strength and virtue. But behind closed doors, in the quiet moments when he was alone with his thoughts, Jonathan was haunted by the knowledge that his life was built on a lie that had become so deeply ingrained in his identity that he no longer knew who he was without it. As Daniel entered adulthood, he began to take a more active role in the family business, a development that both pleased and troubled Jonathan. On the one hand, he was proud to see his son following in his footsteps, eager to contribute to the legacy that he had worked so hard to build. But on the other hand, he knew that Daniel's involvement in the business brought him closer to the truth, closer to the secrets that Jonathan had worked so hard to conceal. Daniel was intelligent, perceptive, and determined, traits that had served him well in his studies and that now made him a formidable presence in the business world. But these same traits also made him a potential threat to the carefully constructed facade that Jonathan had spent years maintaining. As Daniel delved deeper into the workings of the family empire, he began to ask questions that Jonathan wasn't always prepared to answer. First, the questions were innocuous enough, focused on the day-to-day operations of the business and the challenges of managing such a vast enterprise. But as time went on, Daniel's inquiries grew more pointed, more probing. He began to explore the history of the company, its origins, and the decisions that had shaped its growth. He pored over old records, contracts, and correspondence, seeking to understand the full scope of his father's achievements and the obstacles he had overcome. Jonathan tried to deflect Daniel's questions, offering vague answers and steering the conversation toward less sensitive topics. But Daniel was persistent, his curiosity fueled by a desire to prove himself in a world that had always seen him as something less than whole. He wanted to show his father that he was capable of carrying on the Ashford legacy, that he could be a worthy successor to the empire that Jonathan had built. But with each new discovery, each new piece of the puzzle that Daniel uncovered, Jonathan's fear grew. He knew that it was only a matter of time before his son stumbled upon the truth, before Daniel uncovered the one secret that could unravel everything. The closer Daniel got to the truth, the more desperate Jonathan became. He began to take drastic measures to protect his secret, going so far as to alter records, destroy documents, and manipulate those around him to ensure that the past remained buried. He told himself that he was doing it for Daniel's sake, that he was protecting his son from a truth that would only cause him pain. But deep down, he knew that he was also protecting himself, protecting the life he had built, the identity he had constructed, and the fragile sense of peace that he had clung to for so long. The stress of maintaining the facade began to take its toll on Jonathan, both physically and emotionally. He became more withdrawn, more irritable, and more prone to bouts of anxiety and paranoia. He found himself waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his mind racing with thoughts of what would happen if Daniel discovered the truth. He became obsessed with the idea that anyone, could expose his secret, that his carefully constructed life could come crashing down at any moment. That Jonathan's behavior did not go unnoticed. Those closest to him, his employees, his friends, and even Daniel, began to sense that something was wrong. But when they asked him about it, he dismissed their concerns with a wave of his hand, insisting that he was fine, that it was just the stress of running a business. He became a master of deception, hiding his inner turmoil behind a mask of composure and control. But the cracks in his facade were beginning to show, and it was only a matter of time before they became too large to conceal. As Daniel continued his quest for the truth, Jonathan found himself confronted with a choice, one that he had been avoiding for years. He could continue to lie, to deceive his son and himself, in the hope that the truth would remain hidden forever. Or he could finally come clean, confess the secret that had haunted him for so long, and face the consequences of his actions, that it was a choice that weighed heavily on Jonathan's mind, one that he agonized over in the quiet moments when he was alone with his thoughts. He knew that telling the truth would mean risking everything: his relationship with Daniel, his reputation, and the life he had worked so hard to build. But he also knew that continuing to lie would only prolong the inevitable, that the truth had a way of coming out, no matter how deeply it was buried. As the days turned into weeks and the tension between father and son grew, Jonathan found himself increasingly unable to escape the reality of his situation. The secret he had kept for so long was no longer something he could ignore. It had become a living, breathing entity, one that threatened to consume him if he didn't confront it head-on. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind clouded by fear and doubt, Jonathan began to prepare for the moment when he would finally have to face the truth. He knew that it would be the most difficult thing he had ever done, that it would require a level of courage and honesty that he wasn't sure he possessed. But he also knew that it was the only way forward, that he could no longer live in the shadow of his secret, no matter how much he wanted to. The time was coming when Jonathan Ashford would have to confront the truth, and in doing so, he would have to confront himself, the man he had become, the choices he had made, and the life he had built on a foundation of lies. But for now, he could only wait, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the day of reckoning was fast approaching, and that there would be no turning back once it arrived. In the grand tapestry of life, there are moments that define us, and for Jonathan Ashford, the incident on the hill was not just a tragic event. It was the crucible in which his entire future was forged. As he looked back over the years that had followed that fateful day, he could see how every choice he made, every action he took, was intricately woven into the fabric of the secret he carried. What was once a single thread of guilt had become a vast, tangled web, ensnaring every aspect of his life and every relationship he held dear. Jonathan had always been a man of formidable intellect and ambition, traits that had propelled him to the zenith of success in the world of finance. His rise from humble beginnings to the owner of a vast empire was a testament to his skill, his drive, and his unyielding determination. But beneath the surface of this towering achievement lay the darkness of a secret that had shaped his every decision and colored his every interaction. For 20 years, Jonathan had meticulously crafted his life to be a sanctuary for his son, Daniel. Every business venture, every financial decision, every strategic partnership was made with Daniel's future in mind. The mansion, the cars, the endless opportunities, all were designed to provide Daniel with a life of comfort and security. Yet, in doing so, Jonathan had created an elaborate facade, a pristine image that masked the turmoil within. The Ashford estate, with its opulent decor and manicured gardens, was a palace of pretense. To the outside world, it was a symbol of Jonathan's success and a testament to his love for his son. But to Jonathan, it was a gilded cage, a place where he was trapped by his own creation. The very luxury and comfort that he had provided for Daniel were the same elements that isolated him, creating a barrier between himself and the truth he could no longer deny, that it was within the walls of this mansion that the true impact of the secret began to manifest. Jonathan's relationship with his son was marked by a profound and unspoken tension. Despite the outward appearance of a loving father and dutiful son, there was an underlying strain that neither could fully articulate. Daniel, for all his outward resilience and success, was acutely aware of the emotional distance between himself and his father. The mansion, though filled with the trappings of wealth, was devoid of the warmth and openness that should have characterized their relationship. The shadow of the accident loomed over every interaction, casting a pall over their lives. Jonathan had worked hard to ensure that Daniel lacked for nothing, yet he was unable to bridge the emotional chasm that had opened between them. He was haunted by the knowledge that his actions had led to his son's suffering, and that guilt seeped into every aspect of his life, subtly influencing his decisions and interactions. That Jonathan's business ventures, once his pride and joy, had become both a refuge and a prison. The endless cycle of deals, negotiations, and acquisitions were not just a means to secure Daniel's future. They were also a distraction, a way for Jonathan to avoid confronting the painful truth of his past. Each success in the business world was a small victory over his own conscience, a temporary reprieve from the gnawing guilt that he could never escape. As Daniel grew older and took on a more active role in the family business, the tension between them became increasingly palpable. Jonathan found himself torn between pride and fear. He was proud of Daniel's achievements, but he was also fearful of what his son might discover. The closer Daniel got to understanding the intricacies of the business, the more Jonathan feared that his secret might be exposed. It was a precarious balance, one that Jonathan struggled to maintain as he grappled with his own inner demons. The mansion, once a symbol of Jonathan's success and his love for his son, had become a battleground, a place where the past and present clashed with often devastating consequences. The opulence and grandeur of the estate only served to highlight the stark contrast between the life Jonathan had created and the reality of his inner turmoil. Each room, each piece of furniture, each carefully curated detail was a reminder of the facade he had built, a facade that was increasingly at odds with the truth he could no longer hide that Jonathan's interactions with Daniel were fraught with tension. He was constantly on edge, fearful that any slip of the tongue or misstep might reveal the truth. He was hyper-aware of his son's reactions, constantly analyzing his words and actions for signs of suspicion. Despite his best efforts to maintain the illusion of normalcy, Jonathan was plagued by the constant fear that his carefully constructed life would come crashing down. In his attempts to shield Daniel from the truth, Jonathan had become increasingly isolated. He had distanced himself from friends and colleagues, preferring to remain in the confines of his mansion where he could maintain control over his environment. His relationships with those around him were marked by a sense of detachment, a guardedness that stemmed from his fear of exposure. Even the most mundane interactions were colored by his anxiety, as he was perpetually on guard against any threat to his secret. The weight of Jonathan's secret was compounded by the ongoing pressure to live up to the expectations he had set for himself. His business empire was a testament to his success, but it was also a source of immense stress. The demands of managing such a vast enterprise were relentless, and Jonathan found himself constantly juggling the demands of his professional life with the need to maintain the illusion of normalcy in his personal life. That as the years passed, Jonathan's health began to deteriorate, a consequence of the stress and anxiety that had become an integral part of his life. He suffered from chronic insomnia, his nights plagued by restless dreams and waking nightmares. His physical health declined, his once strong and imposing figure becoming gaunt and haggard. The toll of his secret was evident in every aspect of his life, from his strained relationships to his declining health. That in his most vulnerable moments, Jonathan would look out over the estate and reflect on the choices that had led him to this point. The mansion, once a symbol of his success and his love for his son, was now a constant reminder of the price he had paid for his actions. The opulence and grandeur of the estate were tainted by the knowledge of the truth that lay hidden within its walls. That Jonathan's internal struggle was a constant battle between the desire to protect his son and the need to confront the reality of his own actions. He knew that living a lie was no longer sustainable, that the weight of his secret was too great to bear. But the fear of losing everything he had built, his relationship with Daniel, his reputation, and the life he had meticulously crafted, kept him trapped in a cycle of deception. That as the pressure mounted, Jonathan found himself increasingly drawn to the idea of confessing, of finally coming clean and facing the consequences of his actions. The thought of revealing the truth to Daniel was both terrifying and liberating. He knew that it would be the most difficult thing he had ever done, but he also knew that it was the only way to find peace. That in his heart, Jonathan yearned for redemption, a chance to make amends for the pain he had caused and to repair the fractured relationship with his son. But the path to redemption was fraught with uncertainty, and Jonathan was unsure if he had the courage to take that first step. The fear of the unknown, the fear of losing everything he had worked for, was a formidable obstacle that he struggled to overcome. The mansion, once a symbol of Jonathan's success and his love for his son, had become a prison of his own making. The weight of his secret loomed over every aspect of his life, casting a long shadow over his achievements and his relationships. As Jonathan grappled with the decision to reveal the truth, he was faced with the ultimate question: Was he willing to risk everything for the chance at redemption, or would he continue to live in the shadow of his own guilt? The answer to that question was not one that Jonathan could easily find. It was a journey that required him to confront not just the truth of his actions, but also the truth of who he had become. The path to redemption was a treacherous one, fraught with peril and uncertainty. But it was a path that Jonathan knew he could no longer avoid, in the end. The mansion stood as a testament to the complex interplay between love and guilt, success and failure, truth and deception. It was a place where the echoes of the past reverberated through the halls, a constant reminder of the choices that had shaped Jonathan's life. As he faced the prospect of revealing his secret, Jonathan was forced to confront the full impact of his actions and the possibility of a future unburdened by the weight of his past. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the tension continued to mount, Jonathan Ashford stood at a crossroads, poised between the past and the future, between the secret that had defined him and the possibility of a new beginning. The choice was his, and the consequences of that choice would determine not just his fate, but the fate of those he loved most. In the labyrinth of Jonathan Ashford's life, the mansion was more than a mere structure. It was a living testament to his successes, failures, and the profound secret he had harbored for decades. As Jonathan approached the precipice of unveiling the truth, the mansion itself seemed to become a character in his ongoing drama, a silent observer of the tangled web of deceit and emotion that defined his existence. The mansion's grandiose exterior belied the turmoil within its walls. From the intricately carved wooden doors that greeted visitors to the opulent chandeliers that lit up the vast, echoing halls, every aspect of the estate spoke of wealth and power. Yet behind its imposing facade, the mansion was a sanctuary of secrets, where Jonathan's guilt and fears simmered just beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. The mansion's design reflected Jonathan's desire to impress, to dazzle, and to create an environment where every detail spoke of his success. It was a place where the lavish decor and the meticulously landscaped gardens were meant to convey a sense of control and perfection. But this very perfection was a facade, a carefully constructed illusion that masked the deep-seated anguish Jonathan felt every day. Each room in the mansion held its own story, and each story was tinged with the shadows of Jonathan's past. The study, with its dark mahogany bookshelves and leather-bound volumes, was where he spent countless hours working to build his empire. Each business deal a distraction from the gnawing guilt that he could never quite escape. It was also here that he would have his most intense moments of reflection, grappling with the internal conflict that had become a constant companion. The library, a sanctuary of knowledge and power, was Jonathan's retreat. Its walls were lined with books that spoke of wisdom and achievement, a reflection of his intellect and aspirations. Yet the quiet solitude of the library was frequently disturbed by the restless whispers of his conscience, the nagging voice that reminded him of the truth he so desperately wanted to keep hidden. The dining hall, with its grand table and sumptuous setting, was a place where Jonathan entertained guests and celebrated achievements. Yet, these celebrations were always tinged with a sense of emptiness, a reminder that despite the outward signs of success, his personal life was marred by an unresolved secret. The lavish meals and extravagant parties were a facade, a way to distract from the underlying truth that he was unwilling to confront. The mansion's gardens were another aspect of Jonathan's life that seemed to be both a sanctuary and a prison. The meticulously manicured lawns and blooming flower beds were a testament to his wealth and attention to detail, but they also represented a barrier between himself and the outside world. The gardens were a place where Jonathan could retreat from the complexities of his life, yet they were also a symbol of the isolation he felt as he struggled with his own guilt. As Jonathan moved through the mansion, he was acutely aware of the way each space reflected different aspects of his life and personality. The grandeur of the estate was a constant reminder of the success he had achieved, but it was also a reminder of the sacrifices he had made and the secrets he had buried. The mansion was a tangible representation of the choices he had made and the life he had built, a life that was increasingly at odds with the truth he had kept hidden for so long that Jonathan's interactions with the mansion staff were another facet of his life that reflected the divide between his public persona and his private struggles. The staff, who had served him faithfully for years, were accustomed to the formality and structure that characterized Jonathan's interactions with them. They were loyal and discreet, but even they could sense the underlying tension that marked their employer's life. Jonathan was always polite and considerate, but there was an emotional distance that was hard to ignore. The mansion's architecture and interior design were carefully chosen to reflect Jonathan's personality and ambitions. The grandeur of the main hall, with its soaring ceilings and elaborate decor, spoke of his desire to impress and command respect. Yet, beneath this veneer of opulence, there was a sense of emptiness and isolation that pervaded Jonathan's existence. The very elements that were meant to showcase his success were also symbols of the distance he felt from his own truth that as Jonathan approached the moment of revelation, the mansion became a focal point of his anxiety. The weight of the secret he had carried for so long seemed to press down on him, magnified by the opulence and grandeur of his surroundings. The estate, which had once been a symbol of his achievements, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on him as he grappled with the decision to come clean that Jonathan's relationship with the mansion was complex. It was both a source of pride and a symbol of his deepest fears. The very structure that had once been a testament to his success and his love for his son had become a battleground, a place where the truth of his past clashed with the facade he had created. The mansion was a living, breathing entity in its own right, a silent witness to the turmoil that had defined Jonathan's life. The anticipation of revealing his secret to Daniel was palpable. Jonathan knew that the truth would have far-reaching consequences, not just for his relationship with his son, but for the entire life he had built. The mansion, as a symbol of his success and his guilt, was central to this impending confrontation. It was a place where the past and present collided, and where the future would be irrevocably altered. As Jonathan prepared to face the truth, he found himself drawn to the mansion's most private spaces, those areas where he had spent countless hours reflecting on his life and his choices. The study, the library, and the gardens were all imbued with the weight of his secret, and each space represented a different aspect of his struggle. The study was where he had tried to escape the guilt through work. The library was where he had sought solace and knowledge, and the gardens were where he had attempted to find peace in nature. In these private moments, Jonathan could see the mansion for what it truly was, a reflection of his inner turmoil and a symbol of the life he had created to shield himself from the truth. The estate's grandeur was juxtaposed with the isolation he felt, and the beauty of the surroundings was marred by the knowledge of his own deception. The mansion, with all its opulence and elegance, was a constant reminder of the price he had paid for his actions and the consequences that awaited him. The day of reckoning loomed on the horizon, and as Jonathan moved through the mansion's halls, he was acutely aware of the impending confrontation with Daniel. The estate, once a symbol of control and success, was now a battleground where the truth would be laid bare. Jonathan's heart raced as he considered the moment when he would finally have to face his son and reveal the secret that had defined his life. Every corner of the mansion seemed to hold a memory, a reminder of the choices Jonathan had made and the life he had built. The grand staircase, with its ornate banisters and polished steps, was a symbol of the rise to power that had come at such a cost. The dining room, with its expansive table and elegant setting, was a place where Jonathan had sought to create the illusion of normalcy. Even as his personal life remained fraught with tension, as Jonathan approached the critical moment of revelation, the mansion itself seemed to take on a new significance. It was a place of both refuge and confinement, a space that had sheltered him from the truth, but also served as a constant reminder of the life he had crafted. The estate was a tangible manifestation of his achievements and his guilt, a physical space where the past and present intersected in a profound and often painful way that in the final days leading up to the confrontation, Jonathan found himself increasingly drawn to the mansion's most intimate spaces. He spent hours in the study, reflecting on the decisions that had led him to this point. He wandered through the gardens, seeking solace in the beauty of nature as he grappled with the enormity of his impending confession. The library, with its quiet solitude, was a place where he sought comfort and clarity, even as he struggled to come to terms with the truth. The mansion, with its grandeur and elegance, had become a battleground where Jonathan's inner conflict played out in vivid detail. The opulence of the estate was a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil he faced, and the very spaces that had once been a source of pride were now a reminder of the price he had paid for his actions. As Jonathan prepared to reveal his secret, the mansion stood as a silent witness to the unfolding drama, a testament to the complexity of his life and the choices that had shaped it. In the end, the mansion was more than just a physical space. It was a reflection of Jonathan's journey, a symbol of his successes and his failures, and a reminder of the secret he could no longer keep hidden. As he faced the prospect of confronting his son and unveiling the truth, the mansion became a powerful metaphor for the intersection of past and present, a place where the consequences of his actions would finally come to light. As the intricate web of Jonathan Ashford's life began to unravel, the final confrontation loomed large on the horizon. It was a moment steeped in both anticipation and dread. As Jonathan prepared to face the son he had devoted his life to protecting, the gravity of the situation was not lost on him. This was the defining moment when the secret he had guarded so meticulously for 20 years would come crashing down, reshaping his world in ways he could scarcely imagine. The day arrived with an oppressive sense of foreboding. Jonathan could feel the weight of the impending revelation pressing down on him as he navigated the sprawling halls of his mansion. Each step seemed to echo with the echoes of his past decisions, a reminder of the path that had led him to this critical juncture. The mansion, with its grandeur and its shadows, was both a symbol of his success and a prison of his own making, a constant reminder of the truth he had been hiding. Daniel was in his study, a room that had witnessed countless hours of Jonathan's labor and reflection. The study was a space of both solace and tension, a place where Jonathan had spent long hours working to build his empire, but also where he had grappled with the gnawing guilt that had shadowed his every success. Jonathan approached the study with a mix of resolve and trepidation, knowing that the conversation they were about to have would be the most challenging of his life. As he entered the room, Jonathan found Daniel seated at the large mahogany desk, engrossed in papers and financial reports. The sight of his son, so focused and determined, was both reassuring and heart-wrenching. Jonathan had always admired Daniel's intellect and ambition, but now he was faced with the painful reality that this very ambition might uncover the secret he had fought so hard to keep buried. "Daniel," Jonathan began, his voice steadied but tinged with the strain of his inner turmoil. "Can we talk for a moment?" Daniel looked up, his expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Of course, Father. What's on your mind?" Jonathan took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts as he prepared to lay bare the truth that had haunted him for so long. He knew that the moment of revelation was upon him, and with it came the realization that their lives would be irrevocably changed. There was no turning back now. The time for hiding was over. "I need to tell you something," Jonathan said, his voice faltering slightly as he spoke. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Daniel's brows furrowed in confusion. "What is it, Father?" Jonathan hesitated for a moment, his mind racing as he considered how to frame the truth. The words felt heavy on his tongue, laden with years of unspoken guilt and regret. He could see the way his son's eyes searched his face, seeking understanding, and it only deepened the weight of the confession he was about to make. "Do you remember the accident?" Jonathan began, his voice breaking slightly. "The one that changed everything for us?" Daniel nodded slowly, his expression growing more serious. "Yes, I remember. You've always said it was a terrible accident, but you never went into details." Jonathan's heart ached as he saw the trust in Daniel's eyes, the trust he was about to shatter with his confession. "The truth is," he continued, "it wasn't just an accident. It was something I was responsible for." Daniel's eyes widened in shock and confusion. "Responsible for? What do you mean?" Jonathan swallowed hard, the lump in his throat almost choking him as he struggled to find the right words. "I made a choice that day," he said quietly. "A choice that led to the accident. I didn't want to hurt anyone, But my actions, they had devastating consequences. Daniel's face paled, and he stared at his father in disbelief. But why didn't you tell me this before? Why keep it a secret all these years? Jonathan's eyes filled with tears as he grappled with the pain of his confession. I wanted to protect you, he said, his voice breaking. I thought that if you knew the truth, it would only hurt you more. I was afraid of what you would think of me, afraid of losing you. Daniel's shock gave way to a mixture of anger and hurt. How could you think that hiding the truth was protecting me? You've kept me in the dark for years. I feel like my whole life has been a lie. Jonathan's heart shattered at the pain in Daniel's voice. I never wanted to hurt you, he said desperately. I was trying to shield you from the reality of what happened. I thought that by keeping it a secret, I was sparing you from the pain. Daniel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Sparing me from the pain? Do you have any idea what this has done to me? What it's done to our relationship? All these years, I've been living in a world where the truth was hidden from me. How could you do this to us? Jonathan watched helplessly as Daniel's anger and hurt poured out, the weight of his confession hitting both of them with full force. The walls of the study seemed to close in, the once familiar surroundings now feeling foreign and oppressive. Jonathan's attempts to explain and apologize felt inadequate in the face of the raw emotion Daniel was expressing. I'm sorry, Jonathan said, his voice choked with emotion. I'm so sorry for everything. I know that my actions can't be undone, and I understand if you're angry with me. I just wanted to make things right, to be honest with you. Daniel's anger seemed to wane, replaced by a profound sadness. I don't even know what to say, he said quietly. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, is turned upside down. I need time to process this. Jonathan nodded, his heart breaking as he saw the pain in his son's eyes. Take all the time you need, he said softly. I understand that this is a lot to take in. I just hope that, someday, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. As Daniel turned and walked away, Jonathan was left alone in the study, the room now feeling colder and emptier than ever before. The weight of his confession hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the price he had paid for his secret. The truth had been revealed, and with it came the profound realization that their lives had been forever altered, that Jonathan's own journey was far from over. The path to redemption was uncertain, and he knew that rebuilding the trust and relationship with Daniel would be an uphill battle. But for the first time in years, Jonathan felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was out, and while the future was unknown, there was a chance for healing and reconciliation. As he looked around the study, Jonathan realized that the mansion, with all its grandeur and elegance, was now a symbol of both his achievements and his failures. The walls that had once shielded him from the truth were now witnesses to his confession, and the journey ahead would be one of confronting the past and striving for a future where honesty and transparency would prevail. In the end, Jonathan knew that the road to redemption would be long and arduous, but it was a road he was willing to travel. The truth had been revealed, and with it came the possibility of healing and growth. The mansion, once a symbol of his success and his secrets, would now serve as a reminder of the choices he had made and the path he needed to follow to make things right.